Whether or not you're a fan of what Marvel has been doing in Phase 4 and the beginning of Phase 5, I think we can all agree on one thing. The MCU's multiverse is confusing. Very confusing. With the MCU Phase 4 releasing over 10 projects in 2 years, there was a lot going on in the MCU in 2021 and 2022. And that was only Phase 4. We're now heading into Phase 5, which promises to really introduce us to what's going on in the MCU multiverse and the multiverse saga. And we kicked off with Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania and Kang the Conqueror. But even after Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, while it explained a lot of what's going on with the multiverse and perhaps gave us some clues as to what's going to happen in the future with Kang and the Kang dynasty, it still raised a lot of questions, perhaps raising more questions than it actually answered about what is actually happening in the multiverse. And I've talked with a lot of people after seeing Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, and a lot of them say that they're really confused about the multiverse and that there are a lot of plot holes and logical fallacies and inconsistencies that are going on with the multiverse that just don't make sense. Now, confusing I can give you, because I do think that the way that they're explaining the multiverse and the way that these films and shows are setting up the multiverse in the MCU is very confusing and really needs to be streamlined a lot better. It's one thing to say that there are 6 magical rocks that are floating around in the universe that contain immense power, and this one purple guy wants to get them all to destroy half of life. That makes a lot more sense than this guy and whatever's going on with the multiverse. That's fair. However, I do think that a lot of what is confusing about the multiverse can be explained, and I do believe that there is actually a general consistency to the explanations given thus far about what's going on with the MCU multiverse, and I'm here to try my best to explain them all to you. So this is my theory, my working theory after Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania of what is going on with the multiverse and what is going on with the Kang dynasty. Here are a few things before we get into the video. Number 1, if you haven't subscribed to the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel, make sure to do so and give this video a like. Let me know if you enjoy these theory videos or explanation videos, and let me know if you'd like to see more of this kind of content going forward. Please make sure to subscribe. We are so close to 1,000 subscribers. Thank you so much for the support on this channel. It really means a lot to me. Secondly, just because I think I have a working theory of what's going on with the multiverse does not mean I can explain everything. I do still think that while I can explain away most of what's confusing about the multiverse, that there are still a lot of weird inconsistencies going on in the MCU. And really a vast majority of that I think has to do with the fact that there are so many different teams working on all these disparate movies and television shows, and they're not really coordinating together with how the multiverse is working as a whole, that you get some inconsistencies. And that is really honestly to be expected. I mean, let's not all pretend that the Infinity Saga was without its plot holes. There was the whole fake Infinity Gauntlet thing that they had to explain away in Thor Ragnarok. So again, while I do think I can explain some, if not most, of what's going on with the MC multiverse, I can't explain everything, and I'll address that when we get there. And finally, there will be spoilers for every single MCU project that has been released up until Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, and that includes the aforementioned Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. So if you haven't seen Quantumania, please come back to this video after you have, because I'll basically be spoiling the entire movie. Alright, without further ado, let's get into it. So let's go back to the Disney Plus series Loki that was released in 2021, because this is really where the multiverse saga begins. And this is going to be a little bit confusing, but follow me here. So as of the very beginning of Loki, or I guess basically that scene in Avengers Endgame where the Avengers are in 2012 New York and going on their time heist, there is one continuous timeline, and there in effect is no multiverse. Basically, up until that point, you can think of the entirety of the MCU as just the only timeline that exists, Earth 616 or whatever they're going to call it. Now, in that continuity, there was a little bit of an aberration, because the Avengers went back in time, but like Bruce Banner explains in Avengers Endgame, they didn't go back in time in that same linear way. They went back in time to create branch realities, meaning that it's not the exact same thing as Back to the Future, where you go back into the past, and then what happens in the past, what you affect there, changes exactly what happens in the future and alters the entire timeline. It's not like that. Rather, they are creating branch realities. Is this the same as the multiverse? Kind of, but not really. We'll kind of get to that as we go along, but this is sort of one of the first big inconsistencies with the multiverse. But for now, let's just accept that this happened and it was allowed to happen, but the MCU is in general still just one unified single timeline. However, one of the things that happened during the events of Avengers Endgame, if you remember, is that the Tesseract was sort of dislodged and it was taken by the 2012 version of Loki in that alternate reality. If you follow the events of the Disney Plus series Loki, you'll know that that Loki was taken in by the Time Variance Authority, the TVA, and the reality that he came from was basically set to be pruned, and he was set to be executed or sent to the void. So in actuality, it's not just that that one MCU timeline is existing on its own and it's maintaining itself. There is this outside authority that is outside of space and it's outside of time called the TVA that is maintaining the flow of time. There are branch timelines that can appear, and these are disruptions to the sacred timeline. That's what they're calling the MCU's main timeline. But the TVA's job is to make sure that they prune these branch realities and make sure that it is still one continuous flow of time. This is all just recapping what happens in Loki and what they tell you. So long story short, I'm sure you've seen Loki by now, but if you haven't, basically Loki and a variant of himself, Sylvie, who is a female version of Loki, go to the end of time, to the Citadel at the end of time, and meet the person who is in charge of it all, He Who Remains. He Who Remains is a variant of Kang the Conqueror and has been tasked with basically maintaining the flow of time and is in charge of the TVA and the bureaucracy. So the Citadel at the end of time, it's important to note, is outside of time itself. The TVA is outside of time, and the Citadel at the end of time is outside of time. You can see at the last shots of Loki that this Citadel is being surrounded by the sacred timeline in a continuous ring. So everything that is going on at the Citadel at the end of time, basically all of Loki episode 6, is happening outside of the continuous time stream. This is not happening in 2023 or 2021 or in our current MCU timeline. This is all happening outside of time. However, and again, a little bit confusingly, but the events of Loki are instigated in 2023 because of what happens with the Avengers time heist. So if you're kind of following here, what happens is basically 2023, which is when the Avengers do their time heist, is when the Avengers go back in time to 2012, create that branch reality, and this is what kicks off the events of Loki, the series. But then the majority of the events of Loki take place outside of time. You see them going to events in 2050 or whatever, to the apocalypses that are in the future. So basic facts here, let's recap. The events of Loki are instigated in 2023, but take place outside of time. So when Sylvie kills He Who Remains, that takes place outside of the flow of time. And what He Who Remains says in the Citadel at the end of time is that if you kill me, you will unleash all of my variants and begin to start the next multiversal war, which he prevented a long time ago. This is really, really important to know because when Loki and Sylvie meet He Who Remains, there are no other Kangs. There is no other Kang other than this one variant, He Who Remains. But once Sylvie kills him, then the multiverse is unleashed, and now there are all these different Kangs, and you can see that the sacred timeline is branching out and beginning to fracture. What this means is that the instant Sylvie kills He Who Remains, which again is outside of time, this resets the MCU sacred timeline, and it basically allows for all these branches to appear, and now all these different Kangs can appear at various different points in their own timelines. This is why it makes some sense that you see at the end credit scene of Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, there are all these different Kangs, and you see Rama-Tut, the Pharaoh of Egypt, who presumably was from a long, long time ago, and the question becomes, well, how did he get there if there was no Kang, if Sylvie killed Kang after 2023? No, Sylvie didn't kill Kang after 2023, she killed him out of time, which reset the entire multiverse and allowed all these different Kangs to start popping up in their own branch timelines in history. That's how Rama-Tut, the Pharaoh Kang, appeared in his own timeline and then was able to convene with the Council of Kangs. And that's why you see all these futuristic Kangs, you see these past versions of Kangs, these modern versions of Kangs, because all of them appeared at their own specific points in their timelines. So again, you have to keep this in mind that there are events that happen sequentially, like 2023 being that inflection point of the time heist when the multiverse breaks open. But at the same time, what happens in 2023 after the time heist is reflected across all time, not just after 2023. And in that one specific regard, I think it does make a little bit of sense, though it's a little bit of a loophole, that after that event, after the time heist, and after that variant of Loki was able to unleash the multiverse by Sylvie killing He Who Remains, that after 2023, in the sacred timeline, the quote-unquote sacred timeline, which is basically the MCU that we're following, after that point is when the multiverse starts to fracture and all the MCU heroes are beginning to see it and see its ramifications. And that's why Kevin Feige said on a red carpet event that basically the events of Sylvie killing He Who Remains allowed the events of Spider-Man No Way Home and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness to happen. That's because, yes, while it happened outside of time, it also happened after the time heist. Again, very confusing, but this allowed the multiverse to start to fracture, and you saw the events of Spider-Man No Way Home and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness happen. Now, it's important to note that the multiverse was referenced before in the first Doctor Strange. The Ancient One told Stephen Strange that he was part of a vast multiverse. What was she talking about there? My best guess about that, and this might very well just be one of those inconsistencies like the fake Infinity Gauntlet, but my best guess about that is that she was referencing the fact that there is a multiverse and there are alternate dimensions and alternate realities, but I don't think she fully understood the full extent of what the multiverse was, maybe, and what it actually meant in terms of Kang. But again, I do also acknowledge that this is probably just an inconsistency as well. So now you're at this point where the timelines have begun to branch, and that's why you have all of these alternate timelines, and that's why you can have your Tobey Maguires and Andrew Garfields and Patrick Stewarts and John Krasinski's appear. But this isn't just reflected after 2023, I want to add. This is reflected across the entire timeline. That's why, again, you have your different Kangs appearing across history. And because of this, because there are all these different versions of Kangs, we don't know exactly how this happened, and I'm sure they're going to explain this later, but my best guess is that a very futuristic version of Kang, maybe the Scarlet Centurion that we saw at the end of Quantumania, the one with the very futuristic looking armor, who is presumably from the distant future, was able to see this multiverse happen, just like He Who Remains, and convened all the Kangs together into the Council of Kangs that we see at the end of Quantumania. So in that sense, it's weird to think about, but the second that Sylvie stabbed He Who Remains, the Council of Kangs immediately appeared because all these different things are happening outside of time, and all these Kangs are allowed to appear at their own specific points in their own timelines, whether it be the 1st century, whether it be the 31st century. So then the question becomes, okay, so there are all these Kangs now, and apparently there was a very dangerous variant of Kang that came from the future, Kang the Conqueror, and they banished him to the quantum realm, a place outside of space and outside of time. Why then did he basically appear at the exact same time as Michelle Pfeiffer did in the quantum realm? And that, honestly, is one of the things that I don't have a great answer for. That kind of feels like one of those things where it's just the story needed it to happen that way, because the quantum realm and its mechanisms of time don't really make a lot of sense. I understand the point of you want to banish him outside of space and time, but again, the quantum realm does seem to function within time in a certain sense, as Michelle Pfeiffer does age 30 years, and I guess Kang is stuck down there for a very specific amount of time, so I'm not quite sure about that, but I guess the main point being is that they thought he was so dangerous that he had to be banished into the quantum realm, which they say is a place outside of space and outside of time. And that is basically the state of play here in the MCU. So that version of Kang is quote-unquote dead, the one in Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. The Council of Kangs know that that version is dead because they are somewhere outside of time, it looks like, as well. I have said outside of time so many times in this video, but it's something important to remember because there are just certain things that are supposed to be happening outside of the main linear timeline of the MCU. That's why it's becoming very confusing, but I do think it's really important to distinguish what happens within the timeline and what happens outside of the timeline. And the Council of Kangs seem to be convening at a point that is outside of the timeline. That's why they can all appear at once. And then it's important to also note that the final lines of that end credit scenes where the Kangs are talking about how the Avengers of this specific timeline are beginning to tamper with the multiverse and they have to be stopped. So my presumption is that the other Avengers in other different timelines have not really begun to tamper with the multiverse in their various stages. But for whatever reason, this very specific timeline, Earth 616, has begun to tamper with the multiverse, and that's why they've become a threat. I'm not entirely sure if that's how it works, but that is my best guess. So again, to wrap up this video, I do think it actually makes a lot of sense how the versions of Kangs can appear when in fact Sylvie stabbed He Who Remains after quote-unquote 2023, because that element, that part of that scene took place outside of space and outside of time, and yet was instigated after 2023. That's why you can simultaneously have your cake and eat it too, where you can say all these different Kangs appear at various different points in their own timelines, and then we're able to convene at a various point, while simultaneously after 2023 in the MCU, all these different heroes are beginning to wonder about the multiverse and are beginning to see its ramifications and its consequences appear in the MCU. It is very confusing, and I could definitely be wrong. I could absolutely be wrong, but this is the operating theory that I am going off of because it just seems to make the most sense to me right now. But again, given future information about Kang, especially in Loki Season 2, this video will come out before Loki Season 2, I probably am definitely wrong. And I'm also willing to bet that I'm going to get a bunch of comments saying that, oh, you missed this part or you missed this point. And so I'd be more than happy to answer those questions in the comments or be told that I'm wrong and just admit that. Because, yeah, I mean, this is a very confusing time in the MCU. So make sure to leave those comments down below, ask me questions, try to poke holes in this theory, and share your own theories as well. I will respond to every single comment that I can, and I'd love to have a discussion about it. The MCU is a confusing place right now. I think that on a meta level, that is part of the reason why a lot of fans are becoming alienated from the MCU, a lot of casual viewers as well, and I'm hoping that in Phase 5 and in Phase 6, we can really begin to streamline and go forward with the narrative moving forward. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, support the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel, and I will see you guys in the next one.